Welcome to the Exit Rich podcast, where the leading authority on buying, selling, fixing, and growing companies, Michelle Seiler Tucker, is dedicated to helping you find the path to retire rich and move on to your next adventure by exiting your business for the desired dream price you deserve. Get ready to exit rich with your host, Michelle Seiler Tucker.
Welcome to another episode of Exit Rich. I'm so excited to introduce a very special guest, Brant Cooper. Brant Cooper is the New York Times best-selling author of The Lean Entrepreneur and CEO of Move the Needle. His forthcoming book, Disruption Proof, will empower people, create value, drive change. It will be released September 14th, 2021. Brant, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about yourself and how did you get started?
Yeah, so the way I tell the story is, I lived through the .com boom and bust in the Silicon Valley area. So, the grand days of the late 90s with all these startups going public, and then the collapse and really 9/11 happens around that same time, and so the world really gets turned upside down. So that was really what got me started in sort of the startup world. And there was a number of people after that were looking at, why do we teach startups how to act like big businesses? Big businesses notoriously launch products that don't go anywhere. They launch products that people don't want. And yet we organize startups very quickly to try to look like big businesses. And there was a number of people, I was among them, that were writing about, let's look at the way startups are successful and use that to create a framework around how to build startups. And so that's what I ended up writing about and really launched my own a new career, and eventually started then going in teaching those exact same methodologies to large enterprises. And so that's what Moves the Needle is about, is how do we teach large enterprises to act more entrepreneurially? And that leads me directly to the next book, Disruption Proof, which is, hey, we live in this digital age. We're not in the industrial age anymore, and our management practices and structures are going to change. So we need to jump on top of that and think about, how do we reimagine businesses for the 21st century?
So when you were in Silicon Valley, are you a programmer? Are you a SaaS guy? What exactly were you doing before you started?
Late 90s was maybe just the emergence of SaaS. And so I was an IT guy. I wasn't a programmer, but I was technical, and sort of crossing that business and technical bridge there. So ended up moving into professional services, and then product management, and then marketing. And so I've worked at all sorts of different functions in startups, which I think eventually leads to being a CEO, if that's what you desire. Having knowledge of the different functions in the company, I think, is key to that. So I did a little bit of everything until eventually I was in charge of everything.
Okay. So you have a lot of valuable lessons from just all of your past experiences, really.
Right. All my failures. I learned from my failures. Right?
Well, we always say we learn more from our failures, right? No
doubt about it.
So just give our audience a little bit more about Move the Needle and exactly what that does. I think you said that it helps big business, because, most people say the opposite, like you just said, that they say startups should act more like big business, right? But you're saying, no, they've got that wrong. Big business needs to act more like startup.
Yeah. So
right?
the way I think about it is this idea of equilibrium, of balancing execution work. So
don't get into your ease yet.
No, I know. Well, I'm foreshadowing here. So big businesses are focused on execution, right? And they're managed in a way. The hierarchy is about we know what got us here, and so we got to keep on doing it, and we have to execute. And so we don't have any room or space or time for this exploration mode. And so that's what makes them sort of slow and not agile and to be honest, not very customer centric. Well, so a startup doesn't know any of those things. They don't have a blueprint for their business. And so a startup actually has to create that. And how do you create it? Well, you go into this learning mode, this exploration mode, and you learn what the best practices are for your product in your market. And you create this blueprint, and then you start executing on that blueprint. So that's the idea, is that you actually have to balance those two parts. The large enterprises, the moment the market changes or even a pandemic hits, and suddenly the world is a different place, and all you know how to do is execute. You don't know how to do that exploration side anymore, and your business is in trouble. So what Moves the Needle did and does is teaches those organizations how to do the exploration mode again, which is hopefully going to invigorate their growth. It's going to create the new markets that they can go into, whether that's 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, or improves the existing market. We have to recognize the uncertainty. We have to recognize what we don't know, figure it out, and then execute what we figure out on.
So exploration, and you can go ahead and get in, because, I have the 6 Ps, and we talked about this before, but I have the 6 Ps in my book, Exit Rich, and you have the 5 Es. And so we can go ahead and get into your 5 Es now, but the exploration one, I think companies should always be learning, right? You're either learning or you're really growing or dying. There is no in between. So we're always learning. That never stops. And I think all companies should always be learning, not just learning from your own industry, but stepping outside of the box, outside of your industry, and learn from huge successors like, Disney, Ritz-Carlton. There's so many huge companies that we can go learn from. So exploration to me is something that's always ongoing, right?
Yeah, I think it needs to be. I think that the way we structure companies, though, sort of the silos that get developed out of the different departments and the layers of management, where people are actually motivated and their performance is measured by, the tasks that they accomplish over some time period. Mm-hmm. We sort of drill out that creativity. We drill out that exploration mode. And so we have to get back to it. And I think that there's, in my mind, a mythology inside the innovation industry that talks about, no, there's an execution side of the business and an exploration side of the business. And I think that to your point, that it's missing this concept that everybody needs to be in learning mode. That's how we do continuous improvement. That's how, when something in the market changes, we're able to adapt quickly to it. And so, all of these companies want to be like the Amazons and the Googles of the world. And I think it's because they have that exploration mode ingrained into their daily operations. They're agile. You can think of, Jeff Bezos' 2 pizza teams. Whereas if your team is too big to, needs to consume more than 2 pizzas, then your team is too big. And so it's building in that adaptability and the ability to move quickly into the very structure of the business.
Yeah, and I think you also have to really be introspective. I always tell my clients, you really need to ask yourself 3 basic questions. Amazon did this back in the 90s. They asked themselves, what business are we in? And I think business owners stop asking themselves, what business are we in? And Amazon said, we're in a book fulfillment business. And then they asked themselves, well, what do we do better than everybody else? What's our core competency? What's our USP? And they said, well, our USP is fulfillment. We do fulfillment better than everyone in the world. And then the next obvious question is, what business should we be in? And that's when Amazon said, we should be fulfilling products for everybody all around the world.
That's right.
Versus just a small book fulfillment center. I think it's also getting back to the basics and asking your clients the questions. What do you need? What do you want? How can I make it easier to do business with us? Amazon is winning because they make it so easy to you can practically buy a horse on Amazon and have it delivered in 2 days. So Move the Needle, what size company do y'all typically work with on Move the Needle? Is it small business? Is it medium? It's
actually very large enterprises. It's some of the biggest brands in the world.
Well, that's awesome. Can you drop some names or?
Well, sure. Target, TD Ameritrade, ING, American Insurance Bank.
Oh, I've never heard of any of those.
No, no.
Oh, cool.
Right. Yeah. So, typically what we did is we started in the innovation group, but then we start expanding out into product teams and marketing groups, and the engagements with all of those companies I mentioned are not necessarily big engagements, but every once in a while you run into a company that has really decided that they're going to change fundamentally the way they do business. And I think ING, the bank in Europe, is really the best example of that complete transformation. They structure their company differently. The way they organize and run their exploration work is different. And I really think that's what's going to happen to all businesses in the 21st century. There's no reason that we're continued to be structured as if we're, just an extension of the assembly line, which was really the industrial age.
Yeah.
I think that one of the toughest things is that what you mentioned is, introspection, self-awareness has not been an obvious leadership trait. I think it is now. I think it's very popular. I think that writers like Brene Brown and others have been talking about empathy and empowerment and vulnerability. And I think that that's modern leadership in combination with some of the traditional, let's go conquer that mountain and rallying the troops and inspiration. All of those old style leadership skills are still important, but they need to now be balanced by this self-awareness and admitting what we don't know and empowering teams to go figure these things out. That's the only way that we can move fast in the digital age. I mean, listen, information and even misinformation is moving at the speed of light. So we can't just sit around and ask for permission and wait for answers to come down from up on high. So,
which I've never done. So I guess that's why I'm successful.
Well, that's the entrepreneurial mindset though, right? I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. That's why we have to teach this to the large enterprises, because that is the entrepreneurial mindset. You see a problem, you go solve it. You don't go ask somebody if you can solve it.
Right. I was regional vice president at Xerox, and I hated it. So I was over 100 salespeople, and I couldn't get anything done. Right. We're having meetings, schedule follow-up meetings, and we really couldn't get anything accomplished. Yep. I'm like seeing a problem, finding a solution, implementing it, right away. Let's get back to your 5 E's. So we got exploration.
Right. So we got the exploration mode, and we've got empathy, which is really, you're sort of alluding to that one as well with the introspection. But that's, people get empathy wrong in the sense that empathy, like if you're going to develop empathy for customers, it doesn't mean that you're doing what the customers say. It means that you're understanding why the customers say what they say. Right. And so it's the same if you're developing empathy for your employees. It doesn't mean that you implement policies that satisfy all of their needs, but the more that you understand them, at least you will understand the implication of your policies. And so developing empathy is about understanding. It's not about necessarily doing what resolves any needs or desires are. You can, of course, and if that's beneficial to your business, you want to do that. But the empathy is really the understanding part. And it's not about, sort of imagining you're the customer. It's actually going out and interacting and observing them and running experiments and trying to figure out what it is that they aspire to, right? It's way deeper than, focus groups and interviews and surveys. It's really understanding what motivates. And listen, customers have more power than ever now, right? They can switch from one. Right? Yep. They switch from one brand to another overnight. Yep. So if you don't understand what's motivating them, then you might lose them.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons that so many businesses are going out of business is because business owners have really stopped creating that wow experience for their clients. And that's why I said earlier is you need to ask your clients, what do you want? What do you need? How can I make it easier for me? And I'm sure you got deeper questions than that to ask customers, but we got to get back to the basics,
Well, I think part of it's almost the dark side of technology. At least I find this with entrepreneurs and startups is that technology has given us this amazing world we live in, but it also means that we can sit behind our keyboards instead of going and actually talking to customers, right? So that I work with young entrepreneurs, and they're trying to figure out how they can scale learning about their customers. And I don't worry about scale, in order to get 1,000 customers, you have to get one first. So go in and you do it the old fashioned way, go knock on the door, do whatever you have to do in order to get that first customer. And it's forming a relationship with that customer, not just making a single transaction. Right.
And so we got exploration, we got empathy, and then we got.
So evidence informed decision-making. And so I say informed and we don't want the data to make the decisions for us. You look back on your career and the experience that you have and the intuition that develops based upon that experience. Right. We want our intuition to be alive and well as well. In addition, we don't want the data just making the decisions for us, but the data and the insights that we glean does help us cut through our biases. Mm-hmm. And it's a great way to overcome conflict as well. So if you're having, if you're clashing heads with your colleagues, you can design an experiment, agree to adhere by the data, and that's a way to clear a path forward. So data just becomes this important asset when it comes to making decisions, so that we know that we're not relying on what we hope is true, or what our biases are, or what our pet projects are. Nobody wants to hear their baby's ugly, but the moment you hear the truth, there's something that you can go do about it.
Okay, so now you're stealing my line.
Uh-oh, okay.
Because remember, I do mergers and acquisitions.
Yep.
Sold over 1,000 companies. I do business evaluations, and that's what I always tell my client. The worst part of my job is telling them that their baby is not as pretty as they think it is.
Yep. Yep.
Nobody wants to hear that their baby is ugly.
But they have to admit it before they can do your work, right? And then make it an attractive offer. So
yeah. And then what's number 4?
So 4 is then equilibrium, which we kind of talked about, but that's really the finding the balance between execution and exploration. So I love the sales example. That's considered an execution job. It's, what you're up to, what you're doing. But I tell you, if something changes in the marketplace or your sales script isn't working anymore, then you have to go into learning mode. So there's a little bit of exploration, mostly execution. And then on the other side of the continuum is, what is banking going to look like in 10 years? And then that's all exploration work. But as you figure things out, you start to execute. So there's a balance there that exists all across the company. And it's really one of those things that the large enterprises struggle with. But so then the final E is ethics. And, I fundamentally believe that a vast majority of employees inside of all corporations want to do the right thing. They want to live purposeful lives. They want to have an impact on their business. They want to have a positive impact on the world. And so we just need to unleash that. And I think that the way we do that is that instead of just putting the corporate values on the website, we actually bring that down to what is the expected behaviors, and we integrate that into missions that we assign teams inside the company. So your mission is to go and do this amount of sales, but here's also the expected behavior, and here's the guardrails around your behavior in order to maintain the ethics that are established by the corporate values. And so I think we just need to integrate that into the daily operations of the business so that people can really feel like they are making a contribution to both the company and society at large.
So are you using these 5 Ps for your corporate training? I guess you're incorporating, right?
Right. So all of those E's are incorporated into our sprints and accelerator programs that we run and the workshops that we do for these large corporations.
So you get an E for effort.
All right. So there's my 6th E, right?
You need a 6E. It's such a 6P. So I just gave you 6.
Well, and then if you do all of that, then you successfully exit. So now we've got 7 E's.
Now we got 7. That's right. Exit. Stole that right off the screen. All right, so let's talk about innovation and overcoming plateaus and things like that. Because, when I wrote my very first book, Sell Your Business for What It's Worth, I learned that 90% of all startups would fail, right? We all know that. But then when I wrote Exit Rich, I did the research, I learned that the business landscape has flip-flopped. It's only 30% of startups that are at risk. Only 30% will fail now. Now, out of 27.6 million companies in America, those businesses that have been in business for 10 years or longer, 70% of them are going out of business. Like you hear about the big public companies, Toys R Us, Kmart, Stein Mart, Pier 1 is closing, Disney stores are closing. But they're not talking about the private companies. And I always say the reason why that 70% of businesses are going out of business is lack of aim. Aim is always innovate and market. These businesses that have been in business over 10 years, they stop innovating. They stop marketing. They're married to their original concept. And I always say you're growing or you're dying. There's really no in between. You're either dying or growing. So let's talk about innovation from your perspective and overcoming these plateaus.
Yeah, so I guess I have a problem with the word innovation because it's not defined inside the organization, and so I think that that's part of the problem. And so if you go into a large company and you go talk to the CTO or the CIO information officer and you talk to them about innovation, and they're going to think technology. If you go talk to the marketing people, then they're going to talk about, we know we're innovative. We're coming up with new ideas all the time for marketing campaigns. Mm-hmm. The CEO is going to go, we're not really great at innovation because nobody's opening up new markets. And the HR people are going, we have an open seating plan and we're recruiting, people that are entrepreneurial. Everybody has a different opinion on what innovation means. And I think that the predominant definition for most people makes most people inside of organizations say innovation is not my job. And so therefore, I think that they've got the wrong definition.
Wow, that's a great point.
Innovation is everyone's job.
Absolutely. Everyone's job. And here's the deal. So, I work with mostly private companies. You work with a lot of public companies. I work with businesses typically 10 million and up. Toys R Us. Toys R Us. I always say businesses have life cycles, right?
Yep.
Toys R Us. So, you're from the incubator to death. Is a life cycle of a human? A life cycle of a business. Toys R Us, 2015, $11.5 billion in sales. $11.5 billion in sales. 1 year later, so that was when they're in their adult. I always say in your adult phase is when you're in your prime. That's when you should be selling your company. 11.5 billion. 1 year later, 2016, they go on a senior citizen. So they filed bankruptcy. 2 years later, 2017, death. They closed 1,500 locations in 3,500 countries. One of the biggest reasons, I believe, is innovation, lack of innovation, but there's a million other reasons. What would you, and Move the Needle, have done in a Toys R Us situation?
So what we would have done is we would have put their teams, they would identify teams. We would want cross-functional teams, interdisciplinary teams. We would have sent them out into the real world to talk to customers, talk to all their stakeholders, partners, anybody that's in their ecosystem at all. And it's not asking them what they want. It's trying to figure out where are they going, what is moving in the world, what is changing. So I'm going to, and this is months worth of work there to do this type of research. It's not focus groups. It's not surveys. Those actually are used to reinforce the beliefs that are already inside the business. Mm-hmm. I want the business to go out there and learn actually what the heck is going on in the world. We do ideation so people can come up with their own ideas, but ideas are literally dime a dozen. A matter of fact, they may be pennies. each now. There's no company I've ever worked with struggled with ideas. What they struggle with is evidence for those ideas. And they struggle with how do they choose which ideas. And inevitably what happens is that the choices are made by company hierarchy. We call that the Hippo effect, right?
Yeah.
The highest paid person in the office is who makes the decision, as opposed to empowering teams to go out and generate evidence. So insights that they're gleaning from customers and other stakeholders, running experiments. And when we talk about running experiments, we're running disciplined, scientific method experiments where we're measuring people's behavior, because people will often tell you things that aren't true. We can't just ask customers to predict their future. Customers are horrible at predicting their own future. So you run experiments to get them to behave in a particular way because they're not lying about their behavior. And so we start picking up on trends and we start picking up on truths, and we're cutting through our assumptions and we're cutting through our biases. And now we're able to start funding internal projects based upon evidence, which is exactly how the startup world works, right? So it takes 1,000 startups to get one unicorn. So if a big business needs a unicorn to succeed, they need to be funding 1,000 ideas. It's incredible
That's
scale.
a good point.
Yep.
You know, Toys R Us, I also tried the Rebirth, and they opened up 4 boutique stores, but those crashed too.
Yeah.
So maybe you should give them a call.
Maybe we should.
And help Rebirth.
They started too late, and you know, with all of that, and this is, again, it kind of gets back to the equilibrium answer, because the thing is that if that's always siloed, like if the idea of trying to reinvent their business is only operated in some innovation silo, then those people are not the ones that are connected to the core business. And there's no way that they're going to have the scale to come up with the new idea that's going to save the company. Whereas if, as we said earlier, if innovation is everybody's responsibility and all of the people are empowered to come up with ideas and then to start generating evidence for the ideas, and then we start investing in those ideas based upon the evidence that they produce, right? So it's just startup metrics, right? Yeah. Venture capitalists don't throw money at ideas that don't have evidence. And they continue to do series of investments based upon hitting milestones. So the method is already there.
Yeah.
It's just that we've created a silo inside of these large enterprises instead of actually making that the normal course of doing business.
So what do you think the time frame would have been to implement everything you just said?
Well,
and turn them around?
Yeah. The companies that did this successfully actually came out of the Great Recession. So the 2007, 2008, 2009, you know, whenever we have an economic situation like that, the startup world burgeons. This is like the stats that you just gave a little while ago. You know, coming out of the pandemic, the entrepreneurialism is through the roof again. And that's actually the same time the large enterprises should be doing the same thing, is that they have to reinvent themselves. They need to, yes, they need to go and continue to execute on what works, but they need to start funding the exploration work so that they can invest today in what's going to produce growth 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, and the real, quote unquote, real innovation that's going to result in new markets 5, 6, 7 years down the road. But you have to start today.
Yeah, 1,000%. So with that being said, okay, so let's think about this. A lot of the examples I gave that are going out of business, that's all brick and mortar, right? That's all retail. Yeah. Obviously, I have a lot more examples than that. But what can retail, what can brick and mortar, what can they do to stop the bleeding? Because there's not a day you turn on the news or read the Wall Street Journal, but you don't have another retail chain like Disney store closing down. Yeah, GNC is closing down 900 locations. Godiva Chocolate is closing down 1,200 locations.
Well, we just had a really tough year too. So we really need to see how things are going to shake out. I actually think that there is a very powerful social structure. I think people like to get out. I think The little downtown here where I live, Encinitas, is very popular. There's all sorts of restaurants that are open. Restaurants, I think, are still a major attraction for downtowns that have reinvented themselves over the last several years. So I don't think that we can measure the future purely based upon what's happened during the pandemic. That's number one.
Well, a lot of these businesses I'm referring to were closing down before the pandemic.
Right.
Restaurants, I mean, that's a whole different animal, hospitality. And I think restaurants are going to come back in a big way.
Well, so you have to exercise a different level of creativity. I think it really comes back to experimenting around those ideas. Capital One turned their bank branches into cafes and internet cafes. So why did they think of that? Right. I mean, they didn't get that out of their MBA.
That goes back to innovation.
That's right. They didn't get that out of an MBA book. And so it's somebody had the idea and somebody ran some experiments and somebody tried, they opened up a pilot and they iterated on it for several years. And now they're doing TV advertisements about it. So it follows that same process. It's empowering employees to come up with ideas, but more than the ideas, they have to be able to generate evidence for the ideas. Mm-hmm. And so,
So how do they get the evidence?
The evidence comes from the way they interact with customers and running those experiments that I talked about before. Yeah. So that's what our sprints teach. So you've got the Google design sprints where they don't do any experimentation. They just get people hacking together products. We already know that people can build products. Building products is the easiest thing to do. Everybody thinks about innovation as being technology, but the fact of the matter is,
I don't think of innovation as technology.
Yeah, well, that's because you're an entrepreneur. But what I'm saying is that's the first place where big corporates go to is technology, but there's no technical risk anymore. Technical risk is not the problem. We know we can build stuff. We've been building extraordinary things for 50, 60, 70 years. We know it. The risk is does a market exist? And so we can run experiments to figure out if a market exists. And we invest based upon achieving milestones. And so even if a business fails, an internal idea fails, we haven't lost millions of dollars. We've lost tens of thousands of dollars. And so the old school way inside the large enterprises is to make big bets based upon the highest paid person in the room. They're spending millions of dollars launching products that nobody wants.
Yeah. Kevin Harrington, I think, does it the right way. You know who Kevin Harrington is, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Original Shark on Shark Tank, actually wrote the foreword for my book, Exit Rich. But, people come to him all the time. Startups come to him all the time with ideas. And he's like, let's test it. Let's get the evidence. Let's run some ads. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. It's funny to me because I don't know if you know this, but inside of large corporations, they run Shark Tanks and they even use the name. And so there's tons of companies that run these internal competitions and they're called Shark Tanks. And what kills me about it is there are people with great ideas inside the company and they're pitching their ideas. And the senior people are sitting on the panel and they choose the ideas that they like. And they choose the idea and they ask questions. Oh, did you think of this? And, where's your patent portfolio? And oh, did you think of that? And the Shark Tank people ask for evidence. They don't invest in businesses that don't have evidence. They want to know what's your month over month revenue growth rate, right? So that's evidence. And so the internal corporate people are not running their Shark Tanks the right way because they're not asking for evidence. They're just trying to demonstrate how smart they are by asking ridiculous questions.
Agree 1,000%. All right, so let's talk about mindset, because I know you have a mindset workshop. And, I always say, because I partner with business owners, I buy businesses, sell them, fix them, grow them. I partner with business owners, kind of like, I don't know if you've ever watched Marcus Lemonis on CNBC, The Prophet.
No, I have not.
Oh my gosh, you need to watch that show.
Okay.
And so I kind of do what Marcus does, but I build them to sell. So I partner with business owners. And I always say, you will never grow the business. And we're talking about private companies, not public. but you'll never grow the business beyond what you can grow the owner. Gotta grow the owner, gotta, work on their mindset, etc. I mean, it's like Marcus Lemonis will tell a partner with a business owner and tell them what to do. And they're like, yeah. They change the name, they change the logo, they change the look and feel. He takes off for another business deal, comes back. The O sign is back up. The O look and feel are back up. And they do completely opposite of what he tells them to do. And I've had issues with my own partners where I'm like, okay, we got to do this and this and this and this. And then I've just found throughout the last 20 years, I'm never going to grow the business beyond what I can grow the owner. Do you agree?
I totally agree. And I think that, I think that the way I try to talk about it is that the owner, the CEO, is responsible for the exploration mode. So
yes.
So the moment they figure something out, they need to be passing that off to the least expensive, least technical person that's able to execute what has been learned to a T. So not cheap and not a bad performer, but you want the lowest cost that's able to do what's been learned to a T. So as an owner, my job is to go and explore, because that's where the new growth is going to come from. So we've got this big unknown bucket. And the moment I learn something, I pass that off. And maybe I can pass it off to a chief operations officer who actually knows how to organize people to execute. But I pass that off. That's not my job. I can't be doing it. If I'm doing it, I can't scale. I can't grow. Right. I can't learn. I can't.
But even before you get to all of that, small business, you'll never grow the business beyond the owner's mindset, because the owner, they're like, well, if I don't do it myself, it's not going to get done. So they're working in their business instead of on their business. Right. And I always say, well, you never grow unless you let go of the control. Right. But they have so many.
Same thing, though. We're talking about the exact same thing. Is the mindset is switching from like, now I know. Once I know, it's not my responsibility anymore. I pass that on to somebody else. I need to be focused on what I'm doing. Right.
And I just find that so many owners have so much hang up from their baggage, from their past, that they let it interfere in their business decision-making and the way they run their company. Am I making sense?
Yes. I think what it is that they don't understand the customer satisfaction is a threshold, not a continuum. So the technical expertise of an owner could be like way high, but the customer is satisfied down here. And so the owner is all like, no, my people can't do this gap. They can't do this gap between what the customer is satisfied with and what I can do as owner. But it's not important for the growth of the company. Mm-hmm. Right? So they can't let go of that. They can't let go of the fact that their employees don't do it as good as they do. And that's the wrong metric. The metric is my customer satisfied? And if so, then that's what you need to be measuring your person on, not whether those people can do it the same level I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
So
once they're able to flip that switch, once they're able to flip the switch that my people don't have to do it as well as me, that's what it provides the freedom.
Well, the funny thing is the people are doing it better than them in most cases.
I don't know.
Because think about it. Entrepreneurs have their strengths. They have their weaknesses. No entrepreneur is good at everything. True. It's impossible. They're good at a few things, but a lot of things they're not good at. So they really have to focus on their strengths higher than their weaknesses. That's what I always say.
Well, I mean, I think that's a kind of a scary level of lack of self-awareness. If you can't get the owner beyond delegating things that they don't even do well.
It happens. Trust me, Brant.
I believe you.
So what is your mindset? I think it's a mindset workshop you have, right?
That's among things that we do, we have the practitioner level of getting them out of the building and talking to customers and running experiments. And then for leaders, what we're doing is we're teaching them how to mentor, not just manage. We're teaching them how to establish the right startup metrics. So this is a really big key here. If you just are managing execution, then you're looking at your people and making sure that they're doing the number of tasks they should be doing over some period of time. But what I really want to know is, are we actually making progress towards achieving the desired outcomes? And so startups do this really well. What is the engagement level of my employees or of my customers? What's my month over month growth of that engagement level? How do I measure engagement? So these startup metrics is a key thing to be able to teach owners. And so then we're teaching them how to ask the right questions. We're teaching them how to remove obstacles. We're teaching them how to delegate authority to the teams. And so there's a lot of trust building that has to go on there because they don't trust their teams generally. And so we have to teach the teams how to share out at a regular cadence the right metrics so that the owner can become more trusting of the team. And suddenly, if this is successful, the leadership find that they are more proactive. They're not just reactive. They're not fighting fires all the time. They don't have to sit there and manage individuals. And it makes them more strategic. And that is like a really big, if we can get the leadership to this point where they're switching over to now I feel like my teams are accomplishing their missions. And now I'm able to take that and bring it to my leaders. It makes them more strategic. And that's the right flow of information. So it's more bottoms up than it is top down at that point. And it's a big mindset change that has to happen for that.
Yeah, 1,000%. I think mindset is everything. I mean, I think it's everything. And, especially for what we do, what we work with in private business, what do they say? 90% attitude. What do they say? What's the saying? About 90% attitude. I don't know.
That's your phrase.
Well, Brant, tell us, what was Brant like as a little boy?
What was Brant like it's a little boy? I don't know.
That's the hardest question, right?
Well, it's funny because I never considered myself entrepreneurial, but I was always sort of a square peg in a round hole. So
I can see that.
Yeah. And so I think as a kid, you don't understand why that is. And then when you get older, it kind of dawns on you the reason why I joke, the reason why I went out on my own was because I was a horrible employee. Managers would pass me around like a hot potato. Nobody wanted to be my boss. And it's mostly probably because I told them what to do. And so, eventually that's sort of sending you all of the signals time for you to go out on your own. But my first job out of college was working for a small consulting firm, and I was kind of the IT guy. And I lasted a year and I dropped out and went and wrote a novel. So that, again, it's sort of very early. There were indications that I was not going to be a normal employee.
I knew that at the age of 8 or 9, because I told my mom, I'm not going to work for anybody. I don't like anybody tell me what to do, period.
Yeah. Well, I guess that was probably there, but it just, my parents were not entrepreneurial. And so it wasn't a lexicon I had, right? It wasn't something that I was not the person with the lemonade stand. I mean, I always worked. I cut lawns and did that sort of thing, but it didn't really dawn on me to be quote unquote entrepreneurial until I went into the startup scene.
So then why would you quit your job as an IT and then write a book? You've never written a book before.
I know, but right. We don't consider artists entrepreneurial, though we probably should. So it's like, no, we're going to go off and become an artist or, write the great American novel. It's more, sort of the aspiration is different than being an entrepreneur, but they're very related. They're very similar, I think. It's a similar inspiration and a similar creativity with the entrepreneur and the artist.
Yeah. So tell us about the process of writing your first book, because I remember when I wrote my first book in 2013.
Well, so my first book, the novel, was just, just having the discipline to get up every day and write, even though.
Did that get published?
No, it did not get published.
How long did that take?
Boy, a year probably.
Why didn't it get published?
Well, back in those days, I'm, sort of dating myself, there was no internet. And so in order to get published, you had to send out, queries and mail chapter. I mean, it was a full-time job just to try to get noticed. And so I think I sent out to 5 agents, and one agent was interested, and, they had somebody read it and they were kind of like, yeah, I don't know about this. And so I just kind of gave up on it. I didn't pursue it as, trying to get it published that hard.
What was it about?
Well, it was as if the world was run by televangelical fundamentalist people, and this person's dad was very instrumental in that revolution coming about, and he was sort of lost and was trying to figure out what his role was in that world. It was timely back then. But yeah, I don't know. Art is also kind of different entrepreneurially in the sense that you don't think about the business side. And so you get that out of your system and you feel like that's sort of, it's out there then. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting, whereas an entrepreneur, you actually have to go build the business side. The next book that I wrote was self-published. And it was the first book that talked about lean innovation and lean startup and product market fit. And it was geared towards a very specific Silicon Valley mindset. And so, I had my community and it did pretty well. And that's what kind of launched this new career.
Oh, that's great. And so then
that book sort of wrote itself, to be honest.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's how I feel about all of my books, is they kind of wrote themselves.
Oh, that's nice. That's a gift.
Well, because, and the biggest reason is because all the content's in my head. It's what I do every day.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not making anything up.
Right. Yeah. Well, my second book, the one that actually, The Lean Entrepreneur, was really a difficult slog. It took me over 2 years to write that. And I think it's because it wasn't in my head. And so what I was doing is I was going around the world and doing workshops, and that was creating the book. And it took me 2 years of keynotes and workshops to actually get the book.
But that was a New York Times bestseller, right?
That's right. Because I pre-sold it for 2 years.
Wow. Oh, you pre-sold it?
Yeah.
What do you mean you pre-sold it? Talk to me about that.
Well, so if people come to events, then they're buying a copy of the book.
Oh, okay. So what's your method for your new book?
I don't know if I have one.
What's the name of it again?
Disruption Proof.
Yep. I knew it. I just wanted you to say it.
Yeah. Disruption Proof. It's, how can leaders and business owners create what I call a RAD company: resilient, aware, and dynamic, able to weather the storms of uncertainty and endless disruption. The pandemic obviously was disruptive, but I think the pandemic was part of a larger revolution, the digital age revolution. And I think that what we face now are endless disruptions. A ship getting stuck in a canal, disrupting global supply chains, ransomware shutting down hospital systems, energy grids collapsing. This is the new normal. And so we actually have to create businesses that can weather these storms.
That is a new normal. And I forgot to ask you that question about, how post-pandemic world affects leaders, today, really, because it's a completely different world than what we used to live in.
Yeah, it's you have to delegate. You can't, and this gets right along with the mindset change that you were talking about. Mm-hmm. Leaders cannot sit around and make all the decisions, and your people cannot sit around and wait to be told what to do. You have to empower teams to accomplish missions. And if you roll up all of your team's missions, then that should be achieving your strategic priorities. And so it's really, it's fundamentally rethinking the way you're organizing your company's work.
Disruption proof. So in hopes and run for a New York Times bestseller, huh?
We can hope.
Look, Exit Rich made Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and we had the numbers for New York Times, but like you and I discussed earlier, you never know.
Yeah, well, you should be very proud of Wall Street Journal and USA Today and having the numbers. That's no small feat.
Yeah, I worked on mine for about 2.5 years too, because we came out in 2020 during the pandemic.
Yeah, not the timing.
We were supposed to launch in April, and we had all these engagements, speaking engagements lined up. And then, of course, the speakers world died, quick death. So we kept having to pivot.
I don't know when this podcast will be published, but we're doing a virtual book tour that's actually starts pre-launch. So we'll be showing up in cities around the U.S. With virtual sessions talking about the book and supporting independent booksellers in great cities around the country. So
that's a great idea. That's from your publisher?
No, that's my idea.
Oh, so tell us that idea again, because I'm sure you can help some authors who hear you.
Well, so the trick is pre-orders. That's actually what generates the momentum. So
tell me about it.
Yeah, most authors wait for the public, and the publishers themselves wait for the pub date, but the pub date's too late. I mean, there are ways you can do it afterwards, but it's a hard slog, and so. The trick is to start creating the momentum, a month or 2 months before pub date. And so we are doing virtual tours around the country, hitting bookstores. We're supporting the independent bookstores, which are struggling during the pandemic and that haven't opened back up. We'll do a moderated talk and take questions. And really, I'm hoping I can help business owners and business leaders think about how to reopen here as the world starts opening back up. Let's think about this mindset as we open back up and make some changes. Remote work is a sexy topic, and it's part of that. Creating agile teams, empowering teams. How do you delegate? How do you build the trust? These are all topics that we'll hit on during the virtual tour, and hopefully people will go and buy a copy of the book from their independent bookseller.
That's amazing. That's such an innovative idea.
There we have it.
Now, how are you driving traffic? Is obviously
we will
you're going to
do a marketing
network.
We'll do a marketing campaign around each one of those. We'll reach out to local businesses, local accelerators, incubators, our networks. Maybe chambers of commerce if they're interested in participating. If people, any of your listeners are interested in sponsoring, then we're all open ears for that. So yeah, every single one of those will have its own mini marketing campaign.
That's amazing. That's innovative, and I feel like that's what the publishers are lacking is innovation.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So that's a great idea. I wish I would have talked to you before my book launched. Because I didn't think of that.
You did well. You did well.
Thank you. All right. So what would you like? Any last minute thoughts? Anything you'd like to share with our listeners? Any profound advice?
I just encourage people to reach out. So I respond to all messages. So if people want to chat with me or give me feedback, I'm open to it. I'm Brant at brantcooper.com. My website is brantcooper.com, and you can pre-order there. I've got some really great book bundles. I'll come and do a lunch and learn or do a virtual speaking engagement, and you can buy some books. So you can do the sort of like the virtual book tour, but do it private for your own business. Happy to give you an hour's of consulting. So there's all sorts of bundles that people can jump in on now at brantcooper.com. And
is that your book website, brantcooper.com?
Yep. And Brant Cooper on all social media. So I really hope some of your listeners reach out and we can have a conversation.
Yeah, and we'll include all the details in our show notes as well. Nice. So what do you want your legacy to be, Brant Cooper? What do you want on your tombstone?
So I don't know if I've got it down pithy enough to fit on a tombstone, but we chose capitalism in the West because it's the best system to solve problems. And I think we need to get back to solving problems. And
Amen.
I think that is the entrepreneurial spirit. It raises the standard of living around the world if businesses focus on creating value for other human beings. And guess what? you can get rich doing it. So there's like upside.
You can get rich and then you can exit rich.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Awesome. All right. Tell our listeners one more time how they can get the book, where all your bonuses are.
Yeah. So brantcooper.com is where you can get the bundles. And I'm Brant Cooper on all social media, and feel free to reach out.
And I'm going to ask everybody to go out and support Brant Cooper and buy his book, because I just went through this process. I know how challenging it is.
Yeah.
You know, I'm praying for you that you make it, that you make all the list. But everybody go out and buy Brant Cooper's book today. And any final thoughts?
That's it. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And I'd love to thank all my listeners for listening to another episode of Exit Rich. Make sure you subscribe and make sure you share with your friends. Thank you for another episode. And thank you so much, Brant. It was a pleasure having you on.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Exit Rich podcast. Don't forget to check out Michelle Seiler Tucker's Build to Sell Blueprint books and Exit Rich, along with more blogs, videos, and resources at exitrichpodcast.com. Be sure to connect with Michelle on Facebook or LinkedIn, and stay tuned for her next episode by subscribing in your favorite podcast player.